He thought he had seen it all. The signs were clear: the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained disappearances. But nothing could have prepared him for what he uncovered. You won't believe what he found when he confronted her. Stick around till the end because what happens next will shock you. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Jason had always been the type to trust people, especially the woman he loved. He and Sarah had been together for 3 years. Their relationship seemed perfect on the surface. Dinners, shared plans for the future, late night talks. But recently, something had shifted. He noticed her distancing herself, becoming increasingly secretive about her phone and her whereabouts. Jason, the ever-patient boyfriend, ignored his growing suspicions. But over time, his gut told him something wasn't right. The feeling gnawed at him, kept him awake at night. One evening, it all came to a head. Sarah had been acting strange all week. She kept her phone face down whenever she was around him, taking it with her whenever she went to the bathroom or stepped out for a quick errand. Her excuses for staying late at work seemed more forced than usual, and Jason couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. Jason had always prided himself on being a reasonable person, a man of logic. But this felt like betrayal, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He waited until Sarah left for work one morning. His heart raced with nervous anticipation, but his decision was made. He walked into her room, where her phone was charging beside the bed. His hand shook slightly as he picked it up, the weight of what he was about to do sinking in. For a moment, Jason hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if he was just overthinking everything? But then the thought of her constant secrecy pushed him forward. Unlocking the phone wasn't hard. Sarah had always been too comfortable with him, never thinking twice about keeping her password simple. The screen flickered to life, and Jason quickly opened the messages. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't what he was expecting. Sure, there were texts that raised his suspicion. Frequent, late-night messages and one too many conversations about being together that made his stomach turn. But it wasn't just the texts that stood out. It was the name. Jason's eyes widened as he read the conversation. The name in the messages was familiar. David, a man Sarah had mentioned a few times, but Jason had always brushed it off. After all, they were just colleagues, right? But these messages were different. The tone, the intimacy, it was all there. And as Jason scrolled deeper, he found something that made his heart stop. Sarah had been lying about more than just late nights at work. There were messages, plans, and even photos. A full-blown affair. Jason couldn't believe what he was reading. His hands trembled, the phone slipping slightly in his grasp. He felt a wave of nausea hit him, but there was no turning back now. His worst fears were confirmed. The woman he had loved and trusted had been cheating on him for months. As the anger and betrayal washed over him, Jason knew one thing for certain. He needed answers. But not just any answers. He needed the truth. And the only way to get that was to confront Sarah. He had to face her. But what he didn't know was that his confrontation was about to uncover something even darker than he could have imagined. Jason sat there, staring at the phone in his hands. His mind raced, his thoughts swirling with a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. The messages were clear. Sarah had been lying to him for months, deceiving him with someone else. But as he read through the conversation again, something didn't sit right. There was a tone of finality in Sarah's last message to David. I think it's time. We can't keep pretending anymore. Let's take it to the next level. The words echoed in Jason's mind. What did she mean by that? What was this next level she was talking about? Was she planning on leaving him? The thought alone made his stomach churn. The rage that had built up inside him started to settle into something deeper, something darker, a sense of betrayal that went beyond just cheating. Jason felt like the foundation of everything he thought he knew was crumbling beneath him. The clock ticked by slowly as he sat there, staring at the screen. The anger was overwhelming, but it was also mixed with a sense of helplessness. How could Sarah do this to him? How could she hide something so monumental for so long? He felt like a fool, like all the love and trust he had invested in this relationship meant nothing. All the promises they'd made to each other, all the dreams they had talked about, were they all lies? Jason knew he had to confront her. He couldn't just sit on this knowledge, pretending everything was okay when his world was falling apart. But as he planned what to say, a part of him hesitated. He didn't know what he was walking into. He wasn't just confronting an affair, he was about to challenge everything that he thought was real. His heart raced, and his mind kept asking one question: why? Why did Sarah cheat? What had gone wrong in their relationship that led her down this path? Was it something he did or didn't do? Jason had never been the type to look for fault in himself, but this was different. The thought of losing Sarah to someone else cut deeper than he could have imagined. And yet, there was another part of him that wanted answers, wanted to understand the truth behind her actions, even if it meant facing the harsh reality that he wasn't enough for her. As the morning passed, Jason paced around his apartment, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. He needed a plan. He needed to be ready for whatever Sarah would throw at him. He couldn't just let his emotions dictate his next move. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. The moment he confronted her, everything would change. There would be no going back. The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped in, her face lighting up as she saw him sitting there. She was oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. She smiled, a small smile that had always been comforting. But to Jason, that smile felt like a mask now, hiding the truth of what she had done. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him like 1,000 pounds. His hands were clammy, his heart beating faster. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Sarah walked over to him, setting down her bag. She looked at him with a slight furrow in her brow, noticing something different in his demeanor. She didn't know that the phone was the ticking time bomb waiting to explode their entire world. "So, what's going on?" she asked, her voice light and casual. But Jason's expression remained unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, just staring at her. Then, without warning, he threw the phone onto the table in front of her. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, her face turning pale as she glanced down at the screen. The blood drained from her face as she saw the messages with David, the photographs, the plans, everything. Jason didn't say a word. His silence was louder than any accusation he could have made. And Sarah, for the first time, seemed lost for words. She stood there, staring at the phone, the reality of what had been uncovered crashing down on her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Jason, I can explain." But Jason wasn't sure if he wanted to hear her explanation. The damage had been done. The truth was out. He felt a cold emptiness settling in his chest, and the anger that had been brewing inside him began to rise again, but this time it was tinged with a sadness he couldn't shake. "Explain?" Jason's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you explain this, Sarah? How do you explain lying to me for months?" Sarah stood there, trembling, her eyes darting between the phone and Jason's face. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The air between them was thick with tension. Jason's mind was racing, but his heart was heavy, filled with an overwhelming mix of anger and betrayal. Sarah, the woman he had trusted, had shattered everything they had built. Her silence, her inability to explain herself, only deepened the wound. Jason, please," Sarah stammered, her voice barely audible. You don't understand. It's not what you think. Jason's hands clenched into fists. He could feel his emotions threatening to explode. He had imagined this moment, but he had never anticipated the numbness that followed. The confrontation he had rehearsed in his mind had turned into a blur, and now all he wanted was the truth. Nothing else mattered. He didn't know if he could bear another lie, another excuse. "You've been hiding this from me for months, Sarah," Jason shouted, his voice filled with frustration. "How could you? How could you look me in the eye every day and pretend everything was fine?" Sarah's face crumpled as the reality of what she had done hit her. Her hands were shaking, and she took a step back, unsure of what to say next. She had always been so good at pretending, at convincing Jason that everything was perfect. But now the mask had fallen, and there was no hiding the truth. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered, her voice breaking. It just happened." Jason's eyes narrowed in disbelief. It just happened? He could hardly believe what he was hearing. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A series of choices. Choices that had led to this moment, to the destruction of their relationship. "You were my everything, Sarah. I gave you my trust, my love," Jason continued, his voice now steady but laced with pain. "And you threw it all away for someone else, for someone who doesn't deserve you." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as the weight of his words hit her. She had never wanted to hurt him. She had never intended for it to go this far. But somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. What started as harmless flirtation had grown into something deeper, something she couldn't control. But now, facing Jason, the guilt overwhelmed her. "I'm so sorry, Jason," she said softly, her voice full of regret. "I never meant to hurt you. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted anymore." Jason shook his head, his chest tightening with emotion. "You didn't know what you wanted," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "What about what we had? What about me? Wasn't I enough? Wasn't this enough?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's tears fell freely now, her face contorted with remorse. But Jason couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman who had promised him forever was no longer the same person. She had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and there was no going back. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The words felt like a knife twisting in his heart, but he knew they were true. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. And the pain of knowing that Sarah had kept him in the dark for so long felt like a weight he couldn't shake off. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sarah whispered, her voice full of sorrow. "But please know that I never stopped loving you. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake." Jason closed his eyes, trying to push down the tears that threatened to rise. His heart ached for the woman he once loved, but the betrayal ran too deep. He didn't know if he could ever heal from this, or if he even wanted to. But one thing was certain: he couldn't keep pretending like nothing had changed. "I need time, Sarah," Jason said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I need time to think about all of this. I can't make any decisions right now. I need space." Sarah nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She didn't argue. She knew she had no right to. Jason had given her everything, and now she had to face the consequences of her actions. As Jason walked toward the door, he paused, turning to look at Sarah one last time. His heart twisted in his chest. He wanted to believe that this wasn't the end, that somehow they could fix things, but deep down, he knew that the damage was already done. The trust that had once bound them together had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. With a final glance, Jason stepped out of the door, leaving Sarah behind, her face streaked with tears. He didn't know what the future held for them, or if there even was a future for them anymore. But for the first time in a long while, Jason felt like he was finally starting to let go. Days passed in a blur for Jason. The apartment felt empty without Sarah. He hadn't expected the pain to hit him so hard, but it was overwhelming. Every corner of their shared space reminded him of the life they had built together, memories that now felt like a lie. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had done, how she had betrayed him, how she had betrayed them. The anger that had fueled him during their confrontation had given way to a cold, aching emptiness that weighed on his chest. Jason spent the first few days in a haze. He went to work, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to that phone call, those texts, those images. He tried to throw himself into his daily routine, but it was like walking through life with a heavy fog clouding his every thought. He didn't know how to move forward. Should he talk to Sarah again? Could they salvage their relationship? Or was this it? Was everything really over? But then one evening, he got a message. It was from Sarah. At first, Jason hesitated. He had blocked her number after their confrontation, but somehow she had found a way to reach him. His hands trembled as he unlocked the message. It was a simple one. "Can we talk?" Jason stared at the screen for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to continue his life without her. He had spent years building his trust in her, and now that trust had been destroyed. But another part of him wanted answers. He couldn't just walk away without understanding why it had happened, why she had made the choices she did. After what felt like an eternity, he finally responded, "Fine. Meet me at the park tomorrow at 5." The next day, Jason arrived at the park early. He wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but he knew it was the last chance he would give Sarah to explain herself. He found a bench near the pond and sat there, trying to calm his nerves. The cool breeze helped clear his head, but the tension in his chest remained. When Sarah arrived, her eyes immediately locked with his, and she walked slowly toward him. Her face was drawn, pale, and tired. She had been crying, and it was evident. She looked like a shadow of the woman he once knew, the woman who had promised to be there for him no matter what. But now, all he saw was the weight of her guilt hanging over her like a storm cloud. "I'm sorry for what I did," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I can never undo the hurt I've caused you, but I need you to know that it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I was lost." Jason didn't say anything. He simply watched her, waiting for her to continue. His emotions were still raw, but he needed to hear her out. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "I don't know how it happened, Jason," Sarah continued, her voice soft. "I was going through things. I felt invisible in our relationship. I thought I could find something with David that was missing. But I was wrong. So wrong. And now all I have left is regret." Jason felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of bitterness. Invisible? Had she really felt invisible with him? How could she claim that when he had given her everything he could? She had never once expressed dissatisfaction. She had kept everything hidden, and now, here she was, pouring out excuses. "You think I didn't try, Sarah?" Jason's voice was low but sharp. "I always made you a priority. I loved you, and yet you chose to betray me. You made the decision to hide things from me, to lie to me." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she reached out for his hand. "I'm sorry, Jason. I am. I was selfish, and I didn't stop to think about what I was throwing away. I was so caught up in trying to fill a void that I didn't even realize how much I was hurting you." Jason pulled his hand away, his heart aching at the sight of her tears, but he couldn't bring himself to comfort her. She had betrayed him, and he wasn't sure he could ever forget that. "I want to believe you, Sarah," Jason said quietly. his eyes filled with sorrow. I really do. But trust is something that doesn't just come back after it's been broken. You've destroyed what we had, and I don't know if I can ever rebuild it. Sarah looked at him, her face full of anguish. She had lost him. She could feel it in her bones. No matter how many apologies she made, no matter how much regret she expressed, it didn't change what she had done. The damage was done, and Jason was right. Trust could not be repaired so easily. I understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. And if you decide that this is the end, I will accept it. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. Jason looked at her one last time, feeling a deep sadness settle in his chest. He had loved her, and part of him still did, but he knew that the person standing before him was no longer the woman he once knew. And so, with a heavy heart, Jason made his decision. I think it's time for both of us to move on, he said quietly, standing up from the bench. Goodbye, Sarah. The days that followed were the hardest Jason had ever faced. The finality of his decision weighed heavily on him, but deep down, he knew it was the right one. He had given Sarah a chance, but the trust they once shared had been irreparably broken. His heart still ached from the betrayal, but as time went on, he started to feel a sense of relief. Relief that he was finally free of the emotional turmoil Sarah had caused. Jason found solace in the small things, his routine, his friends, and the moments of quiet solitude that allowed him to reflect on his life and his choices. But there was one thing he couldn't shake: the question of why. Why had Sarah done it? What had caused her to betray him? He spent countless nights lying awake, pondering the answers. Was it something he had done wrong? Or had Sarah simply changed? Eventually, Jason realized that the answers didn't matter. What mattered now was his own healing. It wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about him, about finding peace within himself and rebuilding the life that had been shattered. He had to move forward, even if it meant leaving behind the woman he thought he would marry. Weeks passed, and Jason began to focus on himself. He reconnected with old friends he hadn't seen in months. He started exercising regularly again, pushing himself to get stronger, both physically and emotionally. He even picked up old hobbies he had long neglected. It wasn't easy, but slowly, he began to rebuild the pieces of his life that had been broken by Sarah's betrayal. One day, while out for a run in the park, Jason's phone buzzed. He slowed to a stop, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he checked the message. It was from Sarah. Jason, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I understand why you had to let me go, but I want you to know that I've been working on myself. I've been going to therapy, and I'm trying to understand what went wrong. I know I hurt you deeply, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I hope in time you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Jason stared at the message for a moment, his breath still coming in heavy gasps from his run. He felt a mixture of emotions: sadness, anger, and even a trace of pity for Sarah. But there was something else, too, a sense of closure. He had let go, and now Sarah was trying to fix herself. That was something he could respect, but it didn't change the fact that he couldn't go back to the way things were. He put the phone back in his pocket and continued running, his pace quickening as he moved through the park. He realized something in that moment. The pain was starting to fade. It wasn't gone completely, but it was no longer consuming him. He had learned to let go, and in doing so, he had found a sense of freedom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Jason's life began to feel more like it did before Sarah came into the picture, only now he was a stronger version of himself. He had learned to trust again, not in other people, but in himself. He had rediscovered his sense of self-worth, and that was something he would never let go of again. But it wasn't just about him. Jason also realized that he didn't need to carry the weight of Sarah's mistakes with him anymore. She had made her choices, and now he was choosing to move forward, to create a life filled with possibilities. It wasn't easy, but he knew that every step he took was one step further from the pain, and one step closer to a future that was entirely his own. Months later, Jason met someone new. Her name was Emily, and she was nothing like Sarah. She was kind, understanding, and most importantly, she valued honesty. Jason wasn't sure if he was ready to open his heart again, but he was willing to try. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel hopeful about the future. As their relationship blossomed, Jason realized something profound. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean erasing the past. It meant learning from it, growing from it, and using it to shape a better version of himself. And in that journey of growth, Jason learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about understanding, trust, and the willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead might seem. In the end, Jason understood that everything happens for a reason. The pain of betrayal had hurt him deeply, but it had also given him the opportunity to rebuild his life, to become the person he was always meant to be. And while he would never forget the past, he knew that the future held something brighter, something more fulfilling, a future where he could truly be happy again. And as for Sarah, Jason wished her the best. He hoped that one day she would find the peace she was searching for. But for now, he was focused on his own journey, a journey of self-discovery, growth, and the courage to love again.